Okay, I have 11 a.m., so we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining me for this quick Teaching Strategies Gold OSEP license updates. For those that don't know me, although I think most of you do by now, my name is Britt Braun. I work at the Department of Education in Louisiana as the 619 coordinator, and I manage the TS Gold OSEP license. We are excited to share some updates with you for the 21-22 school year. We have a brief presentation, but I encourage you to just drop some questions in the chat as I go along, and I will likely wait until we go through our presentation to share some and answer some questions at the end of today. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to start just by doing a little bit of an overview of the teaching strategies license history and some of the milestones over the last few years. So in Louisiana, we have 3 different teaching strategies licenses that we use to measure child's growth and development for a number of different purposes. We have our early childhood license, which is used for all publicly funded children that attend public and non-public pre-K, Head Start, and child care centers. Of course, we have the OSEP license for all children ages 3 through 5 with IEPs, which now includes children who receive speech services. And then we also have the kindergarten entry assessment, the KEA license, which uses a smaller item set and helps determine kindergarten readiness. So at the start of implementing Teaching Strategies Gold, programs were using 100% of the item set, but it's gone through a couple iterations with item sets specifically over the last few years. In 2016-17, LDOE adopted an abbreviated item set of the license. And then in 2018-19, as you know, we utilized APES, but then transitioned into the use of the TS Gold OSEP license so that we could really work on ensuring some increased coordination with EC programs, as that is the assessment tool that EC programs were using. And then the item set went through another shift in 2018-19 as well, where within the EC license, programs were asked to use 70% of the objectives that were offered. Moving into the 21-22 school year, we are sort of keeping all of these big milestones in mind and really thinking about additional ways that we can kind of streamline the coordination of both of the EC and OSEP licenses. So to provide some additional context in terms of the 3 licenses, LDOE manages 2, that being the OSEP and EC license, which we call Org 495. And those networks who do have KEA licenses, those individual networks actually manage those. So LDOE manages the OSEP and EC license. And right now, within each of those licenses, there's a utilization of a unique item set. So our early childhood requires a limited item set, while as you know, the OSEP license requires the full item set. And currently, we only have duplicate child prevention capabilities within our OSEP license. So as you know, if there's a duplicate profile, then you would contact me and we would go in and look and see if there's a profile that's archived that needs to be reactivated. But within our EC license, we do not have that capability turned on and used in the general license. In terms of the management of child portfolios, as you know, early childhood children are entered in each of the programs. So children who do have IEPs may have both an early childhood portfolio and an OSEP portfolio. And of course, those may or may not be managed by different administrators, just depending on the network. And then in terms of the assessment data ownership, some Head Start programs continue to hold individual licenses. And there's a different management of programs and sites within both of our licenses currently. So with all of that in mind, We are really excited to begin thinking about a license restructure for the 21-22 school year, because we know that managing these two separate licenses can really have an impact on data quality and validity and reliability. And in an effort to support our long-term goals, really around the creation of a longitudinal data warehouse, we're really focused on an increased need for alignment as it pertains to all children birth through kindergarten. So we are going to be what we're calling a license merge, but we're actually going to be creating a brand new license that houses both early childhood and OSEP within one standard teaching strategies license. So we're combining them, but essentially we're building out a new license so that there are some capabilities that we can also add that we've learned through managing both licenses are really necessary for that quality data, validity, and reliability. And we're really excited because we know that with this effort that there are going to be a lot of redundancies that are removed, especially for OSEP users. I know that it's a time commitment and there's a lot of manual work that needs to go into managing the OSEP license in addition to what we also house in our EC license. We also know that merging this and building out a new license is going to ensure that there's a higher level of data hygiene. So when it comes to naming conventions, programs, and site level structures, we actually have a lot of those in our OSEP license because we've been able to learn from our EC license and input some of those measures of quality in the OSEP license, but we're really excited to expand that to also support our general EC license as well. And we really think that this is going to help support an emphasis on inclusive practices. Right now we have, in some cases, general ed teachers completing portfolios for children in the general EC license. And then we also have service providers completing that same objective set in the OSEP license. And we really want the data to tell the story of the whole child and really depict all of the data that we're collecting from any of those providers or teachers who are working with these children. And so with this merge, there's really going to be more of a focus on that increased collaboration with service providers. What that means is that the general education teacher would be the primary teacher for that child's portfolio. And then any direct service support, itinerant service, or service providers would then have team member access. And that way there would be one portfolio that all of the support roles are working on. However, the finalization of that checkpoint rating would live with the primary teacher for that child. So we would be that would be a little bit of a shift for service providers, but I think it would allow them to really focus on supporting quality documentation input for those objectives that are really specific to the child's IEP. And then again, a collaboration with teachers to help rate other objectives that may be relevant as well. We're also really excited that this is going to provide an opportunity for an increased alignment between GOLD and the early learning and development standards and high quality curriculum. As some of you may be aware, we're also in the process of re-reviewing our early learning and development standards with a specific focus on increasing inclusive language and supports for children with disabilities. And so we want there to be more of a direct alignment to our early learning and development standards and the developmental trajectory within teaching strategies GOLD. And finally, there will also be improved reporting capabilities for us and better data quality for the APR. With this restructure, we're excited to continue building out ways to support using the data that we house in our teaching strategies licenses to help inform instructional practice and creating specific goals for children with individualized needs and supports, and really using that data within the APR to drive practice. So the current timeline, as you can see, is a pretty quick turnaround for building out this new license. We've been conducting a lot of field engagement up until this point, really working with teaching strategies to problem solve and bring any questions that we've received from the field back to make sure that we're really unpacking every little detail that we need to ensure this is a very smooth transition. And of course, we'll be building out lots of guidance and support to make sure that networks feel equipped once we move into this, the use of this new license. During the summer months of May and June, we'll be offering some administration TA and then some teacher leader training, and of course, some field support and office hours. And we are still, the field engagement is ongoing. And so if there are any individual networks that would like to set up direct calls and just talk through this process, we are happy to schedule that over the next few weeks or month, or even during the summer once some of the guidance is released, to make sure that you have all of your questions answered. So I want to talk a little bit about what that kind of looks like for the OSEP roles specifically. We still want the OSEP administrators to play a really active role within this new gold license. However, this means that there will just be a lot less time focused on moving some of that data from the EC license into the OSEP license. So with this one merged license, all of the entry assessment data will actually just be collected through the early childhood checkpoint dates. So when a child has an IEP developed throughout the year, that child that already has a portfolio or profile in teaching strategies, you would really just oversee that. Then we would check off the box that the child has the IEP, that the additional objectives 1C1 through 1C4 would populate. And then you would just oversee and ensure that all of the checkpoints are rated and finalized within the checkpoint window in which that child begins receiving services. So there will be no duplicate entry assessment in an OSEP license. And I think that that is a really exciting component of this license merge that will really help support the quality of the documentation rather than, our OSEP administrators, you all spending too much time really just making sure that that information gets transferred from one license to the next. So of course, we would want to make sure that you're monitoring those roster updates, and that of course, when any child does have an IEP developed, that then we're reflecting that within the general license by checking off IEP and making sure that entry assessment information is finalized and completed within that checkpoint window. Of course, there will be a little bit of a shift with service providers and special education teachers and general ed teachers in the way in which folks are collaborating to add documentation. That would be something new for folks who are only specifically working in the OSEP license right now because there's no documentation required. So, again, we really want there to be a strong, comprehensive, quality portfolio of documentation for the child. And so we're hoping that with more folks working on one profile, there's more time to add that documentation and to add additional information rather than just going through and checking off some final ratings. Of course, we still want there to be some intentional monitoring of child's outcome data and ongoing support. Obviously, we're pulling the OSEP information to report within our APR and really look at how our children who do have IEPs are performing throughout the year compared to their same aged peers. And so we want to be really intentional about making sure that you're working with other administrators in the EC license to continue to share the purpose of OSEP, why we report it, what it looks like, what we're really measuring, and how Teaching Strategies Gold plays a role in monitoring that for a child who does have an IEP. And then lastly, there will still be an exit request process that won't look very different. It will just happen within that license. But we would still want OSEP administrators to support that exit request. There are a few questions coming in. I'm actually going to pause right now so I can answer some of them as they are relevant to this slide. Just give me 1 minute. So I am recording this presentation and I will be sending a link after this meeting so that you have the recording and you have the slides, and I will also send a PDF of the slides for you as well. There is a question, will this still need to be done within the first 6 weeks of service? So it will have to happen within whatever checkpoint that child begins receiving services. So currently in the early childhood license, there are 3 checkpoint dates in the fall, winter, and spring. So as soon as a child has an IEP developed, whatever date that falls in will be within that window of that checkpoint. So you won't be going in and creating an entirely different entry assessment. You'll simply just ensure that whatever checkpoint window, the fall, winter, or spring, that child starts receiving services, that there is a assessment finalized and completed within that window, which is what already happens in the early childhood license. So again, that should remove a lot of redundancies for you because there won't be an additional entry assessment. It will be the same documentation that's being collected for that child within that checkpoint window. Another question, does this mean that all students will have the full TS Gold administered, so all items? So that's a great question. And yes, that means that we would be moving to a full item set, which is what we are currently rating within the OSEP license. So that will be a bigger shift for our early childhood license as they are using that 70% abbreviated item set. So that is definitely a shift. We are still working on what networks have flexibility around. One of the things that we've really been brainstorming is especially for this upcoming year, potentially only requiring documentation for the 70% and then just asking teachers and administrators to make sure that the full item set is finalized and rated so that there wouldn't be an increase in the amount of documentation included, but every item objective and within the item set would be rated and finalized. And if you have additional ideas or questions and comments about that, we'd love to schedule some time to continue to brainstorm, as we really want as much stakeholder input and feedback as we can gather prior to the launch of this new license. There's another question about the Head Start students since you don't have access to their license. This question has come up a lot. We don't have a final resolution for what this looks like yet, but just know that this is something that we are continuing to work with teaching strategies on to see if there is a way to better streamline that so that there's continuity in the level of access for children who are in Head Start. So we are hoping to have some updates regarding that in the very near future.
Hey, Britt, this is Meredith.
Hey, Meredith. Great for you.
Hey, I also just wanted to add, I've also talked to a few lead agencies where the lead agency is the Head Start grantee. Now we know a couple of our Head Starts had gold licenses that predate the state license, but if you do work with your lead agency and you are the Head Start grantee, I would encourage some conversations between, the Head Start and y'all, because we do want to get everybody under the state license to kind of, streamline those data, sharing points, but also it's really a cost saving measure for the Head Start that's the state license is available to you at no cost. And so it could be a great way to, use funds in a different way.
Thanks so much, Meredith. And I'm just seeing now that you were able to join us. So thank you so much. Okay, let's see. There are a couple other questions about children seen in homes and daycares that are 3 years old. So for any child that's not currently in the early childhood license, but that does get added to OSEP, we would still be adding that child's profile to the new merged license, and the service provider would be the folder holder, oversee that child's profile. Give me just a sec. I'm reading through a couple more messages. And then Stephanie, I'm looking at your question. What if a child is in a private school without TS Gold who has a community SPED teacher? Can you elaborate?
You answered the
Okay.
Yeah, you kind of answered the question when you answered about the daycares and private homes.
Okay.
It's the same situation. I didn't see that one before I text mine.
That's
Yeah.
okay. I just wanted to make sure I was clear.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah,
I
I
was
just wanted to
thinking as well.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Thank you.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, thank you. And you know, we're still working on sort of what the naming protocols for programs and sites will look like, because OSEP is at a program level, and the early childhood license is not. It gets, you know, a little bit more granular with sites and classrooms and teachers. So we still are working with teaching strategies to make sure we know what that looks like for a child who may not be in the EC license, but that will be added to this merged license. So this will begin in August. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is Cheryl Mitchell, St. Martin Parish.
Hey,
I do
Cheryl.
have a question. I think it got run back up to the top, so you might not have seen it, Brett. But who's going to pull the OSEP report then? Is that still incumbent upon us to do that? And I guess that's my major question, because that's the biggie.
That's a great question. I think there will still be a level of pulling the OSEP report at the network level, but we are also working on our end to see what we can pull for OSEP on a continuous basis. We're really trying to find better ways to increase alignment between SIR and teaching strategies in terms of importing information, cross-checking information, making sure that children are being added and are up to date, and then pulling OSEP reports at various points throughout the year. So that's a great question. We're still working through that. If you have ideas, I would love to schedule a follow-up conversation to brainstorm, you know, what that looks like on your end and what is really supportive for you in terms of when you pull that report and how you use it, and then, you know, what needs to get reported to us and the frequency of that as well. Okay, I think I have answered all of the questions. I'm just going to do one more read through and give everyone another minute or so to add any additional questions before we move on, and we are going to wrap up fairly shortly.
I'm sorry, this is Penny from Bossier. I may have missed it because I was in another meeting, but so with this new format transition, so right now I call them babies, our 3s and 4s that are in daycares and all. We do an entry and exit. So with this new reconstruction, would we have to do the checkpoints throughout the year?
You wouldn't be adding an additional entry or exit assessment. It would be the entry or exit information that falls within those checkpoint windows. So say we are within the winter checkpoint window and a child has an IEP developed and starts receiving services. The entry assessment information would be added to that child's portfolio, and that entry assessment data would get pulled once that winter checkpoint gets finalized. Okay,
but would they, like right now, they in OSEP, they only do the entry and the exit.
Right.
Would they have to do the 3 checkpoints during the year on each of those children that are not in school?
That's That's a great question. And actually, it's not something that we've developed a final answer on. So to clarify, that means for a child who may not already be in the EC license, who does not attend a program, right now you're only adding information for an entry assessment and an exit assessment. But with this merged license, the question is, would that child then be required to have 3 assessments for each of the 3 checkpoint windows? It's a great question, and I think it's something that Meredith and I will have to discuss a little bit further with teaching strategies and just make sure we know what that looks like from a technical standpoint. But we can absolutely follow up and let you know what we find out about that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I also saw, Penny, I don't know if you heard me answer that this will begin in August, moving into the 21-22 school year. The last piece I will note, and we are still working on logistics with this, but there will be a need to keep the OSEP license open for the 21-22 school year for children who have already been added, as there's no streamlined way to move that entry data from one license to the next. So we're still working out the details and logistics of that, but we are thinking about making sure that the OSEP license stays open for 1 year as we merge, and that way any child who's already been added to that OSEP license, we can exit if the exit is appropriate within next year's time frame. And if not, look at the children who may be in that OSEP license for more than 1 year and then work with teaching strategies to get their profiles transferred so that we can close out the OSEP license at the end of the 21-22 school year. One of the things that is going to be extremely helpful for us to figure out the most efficient way to do that are some of the action items that I've listed here. So there's a high need to make sure that we can clean our current OSEP license up as much as possible, which is going to give us the most opportunity to make sure that this process is really, really efficient. So there are a couple next steps I want to highlight with the current license that will really help us build out the new license and ensure that the transition is efficient. So I'm asking that all administrators go in and run the OSEP status report. And if there are any children within the system historically that should have been exited, that are well past 5 years old, that you go ahead and archive those children. Make sure that for any active child that the HAS IEP box is checked off within the profile. We've run the numbers recently, and there's a large cohort of children where that's not checked off yet. And then think about planning ahead for upcoming exits. We want to make sure that the exit process this spring for any child who is getting ready to matriculate to kindergarten or exit services in May, that those exit processes happen really efficiently, because the sooner we can exit those children and close out, the better sort of landscape we have to begin working on what we're going to do with the children that are still in the OSEP license that we will either need to house there for 1 more year or begin to manually transition into our new license. So those are just a couple ways that you can support cleaning up this license and making sure that we can run it really efficiently. And I would reiterate that if your network does have a desire to meet with Meredith and myself and just talk through this a little bit more, we are happy to schedule some time over the next few weeks or even over the summer or whenever you are thinking that you need some more clarification. And we will, of course, schedule some additional office hours to make sure that you are up to date with any questions that have come up that we're still working through and guidance that we are building out to make sure that this is a really seamless transition. So I did share at the beginning, I am recording the webinar. We'll be sharing a link as well as the slides. And then of course, my email address and Meredith's are included. So if you would like to reach out and schedule a call. We're happy to do that. And I see one more question regarding the KEA license. Nothing with the KEA license would change. So if your network still manages that, that would be the same. There will be no merge of the KEA with the OSEP or early childhood license. Those will still remain separate.
I'll just reiterate, Britt, we would love to talk. There's definitely things that need problem solving, and you know, you guys are experts at this and raise questions that haven't been asked yet. So we would love that. And just to Debbie's point, the KEA Gold for KEA is an option. It's just only one of two options for the KEA. So that's why it'll continue to be individually managed by networks. So many networks don't use it at all. They use the DRDPK. So.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Well, we are at time. I thank you all so very much for your time this morning and your questions and input. We are really excited about this, and we hope that this allows some more efficiencies for you all as OSEP administrators especially. And we will be in touch. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.